So that's our first integration point. Now what will happen here is once we create that integration point, it's going to let us go and it'll drill us down from the, let me just jump to the Java EE cartridge, and if I'm on the monitor here, basically what I just did, the coding I just did, would let me go from this 179, and it automatically would log me into the experience viewer and pull that information back from the experience viewer. Actually, sometimes what happens here, if I pick one that doesn't have a JSession ID, it's not going to drill me in. So you have to make sure that this is one that is sessionized, and then it'll connect you to the appropriate hits inside the experience viewer. Okay, so let's finish up by creating our second part here. And our second part is, instead of connecting the one that we just did, so what I just did is I made this connection here. The next connection I want to make is I want to connect us down in the traces. If you remember from the first demo, we drilled down from a single trace into the experience viewer as well. So this one I did a little bit more of a fancy integration. And what I did here is I edited this table, right, and I have to pass it one of these request types to this function in order to create my URL. So let's take a look at what I did to make that happen. So if you click on design, and we want to follow the same type of thing I did here, and I'm just showing you this to make it easier instead of jumping right to the table. So what we want to do is we want to look for that piece, which is that little table, right? Just like we did for the other one. Now if I click on this, this is my request type traces table, and I can go to inspect. Okay, now what I did on this table is I edited it, and I went to my configuration and I added another column. So what I did is I went here under columns, and besides the columns that it already has, I added another column called replay, and I moved that replay column up. Now when it asks you in replay for a value, what I did is I set that value to our icon. Remember I showed you the icon in the custom directory? So if I went to value and edit, I'd be able to actually pick, I would go here and I would go set the binding, right, and that binding would be an icon. And then once I went to the icon, I was able to navigate. Let me just show you the navigation here. And I was able to go up to my custom cartridge, right? So under Java EE custom integration, I picked my end user icon. Okay, now what you have to do is once you have that end user icon, I put this tooltip in there. This is an optional tooltip. It won't really do anything if you don't have that in there. And you definitely need an ID. So I set the ID. I called that replay, and I just did that by clicking edit, and it gives you a string field, and I just called that string field replay. It doesn't really matter what you call it as long as you're consistent. Okay. So once I created that, I also needed to make sure that this column was included in my grouping. So this depends on where you want to position it. And what I did here is I went to the column group order, and I set my replay. You'll see it right here. I set this right after my exception exits. So I added a column ID here, and I have to define this. I have to call it replay because that's my identifier, and then I was able to move it up in the list and put it where I want it. And that's what will happen. Let me just jump back and forth and show you that piece. So basically what that positioning does is it lets me put the that icon for the end user in a very specific place of my choosing. So on these 15, you'll see replay is right here, right next to exceptional exit, and that's basically because I told it to go there. Now the last thing I have to do is just like I did in the other view. I have to go to the flow, and on the flow I have to edit the cell selection. So again, my cell is called replay, where that's the picture of the cell I put the end user. And what I want to do is I want to go to a next page, and I'm going to use that same view that I used for the other for the previous one where I did the request type trace, but my URL is going to build differently. Now what I want to give my URL now is I want to go edit here, and I want to call the function called getHits for request trace, which is my second function. And this guy, this getHits for request trace, because we're in a request trace view, he wants a different value. So instead of putting a Java E request type, he wants a request trace value. So what I can do here is I can populate this by clicking edit, or I would set the binding actually to context. Then I'd go edit, and I'd be able to pick request trace value, which is available in that row of data already. Okay, so basically what this is doing here in this function now is when you're in this request trace view, you're going to be able to drill down on this end user, and that function call that we just coded in is going to build that drill down for you. So this is going to take you to that specific trace. Actually, let me walk through the whole thing. That specific trace inside the Foglight Experience viewer. Okay. So this is the, let's try one more time. Okay, I have the JSession ID. Okay. That's typically what should work. So usually you're going to get a hit here. For some reason I'm not pulling that hit this time. But what we're doing is basically to FXV we're passing it a JSession ID, we're passing it a method, and we're passing it the path, which is login.do. And once we're passing that back to the viewer, it's able to pull back the hits that we need. So probably what's going on here is this cookie is getting set because I just recognize we're using the actual login itself. So what I'm going to do is instead I'm going to use this one here, which is our getMedicalRecords.do, and let's see if we get a trace on that one. Yeah, see here we have a trace because this cookie is already set. So now I get those two traces for those user sessions, and just like in our demo we'll be able to drill down to those. So the exception that you just saw is just interesting. I can point that out. The exception you just saw is because the JSession ID wasn't set, or it wasn't set at the time that the end user session captured it. So it doesn't have that hit in the system reference with this proper session identifier. But in most cases that shouldn't happen. It's nice that I'm able to point that exception out to you. Okay, so this concludes our demo. Like I said, you can send a request to me to get that zip file, and then also use that same address if you have any questions, and I can help you with this integration. I'm not doing any incremental releases or support for this, so it's kind of what you see is what you get, and you could of course do the edits yourself on it if you need to do any enhancements. Thank you for attending.